Tell me, and I forget. Teach me, and I remember. Involve me, and I learn. Good morning, everyone, esteemed dignitaries, professors, and fellow students. We appreciate your patience and thank you for joining us today. On behalf of CMR University School of Legal Studies, I welcome you all to the guest lecture on Pakistan's civil-military relations, the coexistence to confrontation. We have with us today our guest speaker, Professor Dr. Bidanda Chengappa, Professor Defense Analyst and Journalist, Member Secretary, Institute of Contemporary Studies, Bangalore. I now invite our Honorable Dean, Professor Dr. T.R. Subramania, to welcome our guest speaker.
Very good morning to all of you. Professor Chengappa is a person with immense experience, and he is an expert in the area of studies, especially in Pakistan and South Asia studies. So last time when he came here for a lecture on security studies, we had thought of inviting him for this. See, knowledge of international relations is very much essential. And this is very much essential for younger students to know how the society develops, what exactly are its relationship with the neighboring country, and what exactly are the drawbacks, whether the rules which are being prescribed in international law are being adhered to or not. If they are not adhered to or respected, for what reason? These are a few of the things which generally haunts a student when he studies or collects some information between states. So we have Professor Chengappa. Sir, we are immensely happy, and on behalf of the CMR group of institutions and the School of Civil Studies, I present a bouquet of flowers. I also welcome all of you. Listen carefully and learn something. The very purpose of inviting these distinguished scholars is to know that there are other students also developing knowledge. And it cannot be developed overnight, it has to be cultivated for years. Then only you will be a scholar. But these remarks
Thank you, sir, for the insightful talk. We have with us today Professor Dr. Bidanda Chengappa, who is no alien to us. He had been our panelist for the National Policy Colloquium on India's national security, portraying his wonderful research and expertise. Dr. Chengappa was with Christ University, Bangalore from February 2012 to February 2020, where he had taught international relations. He conceived the Masters in International Studies program in 2014 and was its founder coordinator at the university in the initial stages. Prior to joining the university, Dr. Chengappa was a senior editor with Deccan Herald newspaper, Bangalore, where he handled the editorial page and also wrote editorials on international affairs and national security. Before that, he was a senior research fellow with the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi, where he headed a Pakistan desk from 1998 to 2002. During this tenure, he has lectured widely at army fighting formations, war colleges, police and paramilitary training institutions. He was also a consultant to the newly created Defense Intelligence Agency, established immediately post the mid-1999 Kargil conflict. Thereafter, he was a research consultant to the Ministry of Defense from 2002 for 4 years, with relation to a Pakistan-related project. Earlier, Dr. Chengappa was a military correspondent with the Indian Express newspaper at New Delhi for 2 years, and prior to that, he had reported on the defense industry for the Hindu Business Line newspaper. As a journalist, he has reported on the Army, Air Force, and Navy intelligence services, besides the Defence Research and Development Organization, and also the Ministry of Defence, which has enabled him to comprehend national security in his own way. And since 2010, he is a member secretary of the Institute of Contemporary Studies, which is a security studies think tank. The ICSP conducts continuing education programs for the Karnataka State Police, State Department of Intelligence, Karnataka Coastal Security Police, National Academy of Customs, Income Tax and Narcotics, Bangalore. The research monographs titled by Dr. Chengappa are the Directorate of Inter-Services Intelligence and another one on conflict among religions in Karnataka. He also holds a PhD on India's relations with China from the Bangalore University and is a master in strategic studies from the University of Madras. We welcome you, sir, once again. We are honored to have you with us.
Thank you for the introduction, and I'd like to thank the CMR institutions for inviting me and Professor Subramania especially, and the organizers for having me here. I'm delighted to be here once again. See, you can look at the next 45 minutes to 55 minutes as whichever way you want to look at it. You want to look at this lecture as being inflicted upon you, or I can take you on a political journey to Pakistan. It will be political tourism in a sense. So the question is, what is so special about Pakistan? It is like relatives and neighbors of ours. We don't choose them, they come with us. In strategic studies, geography always matters first and then history, because geography is there before history. So on that note, I've got exactly maybe a dozen slides or so to share with you. See, governance in every country involves civil military relations. Even in India, there is a lot of civil military relations, but only civil military relations do not occupy center stage in India. If you look at the states, if you look at Karnataka, if you look at Bangalore, there's a lot of civil military relations happening. Between the chief secretary and the military man here, there's a lot of interaction over land and stuff like that. But in the case of Pakistan, it's much more serious. See, Pakistan has the unique in South Asia, because civil military relations has become a very defining feature of Pakistan. Just to give you a brief introduction into Pakistan, I mean, I've been immersed in Pakistan from 1998 onwards, off and on, sometimes in a big way, sometimes very peripherally. So just to get you familiar before I get into the depths of my presentation, there are three major political parties in Pakistan today. The first one is the PPP, or the Pakistan People's Party. And then you have the PMLN, Pakistan Muslim League, in brackets Nawaz. And the Johnny come lately is the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, which is the celebrity cricketer Imran Khan's party, which is very young, 1996 onwards. So these are the three political parties. And then you have ethnic parties. The ethnic party is the MQM, Muttahida Qawmi movement, which is the Mohajirs of India. So that's an ethnic party. Then you have regional parties like the Awami National Party from Balochistan, and then the TTP and whatnot. So that is a brief introduction. The PPP was founded by the late Zulfikar Ali Bhutto as of 1967, and its philosophy is Islamic socialism, and it's a left of center party. Now, till 1998, civil military relations in Pakistan was all about coexistence. In 1998, you had that military dictator whose photograph is there, General Zia-ul Haq. Zia-ul Haq had an unfortunate death. His plane crashed. It was a supposedly CIA conspiracy or whatever. So when his plane crashed in August 1998, elections were declared in Pakistan. And the late Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's daughter, again late Benazir Bhutto, she fought the elections. And from that time onwards, civil military relations in Pakistan were confrontational. And then you had 2007, there's the lawyers movement in Pakistan. The lawyers agitated on the streets and brought street power into action. And they finally ousted President Musharraf. President Musharraf was in the news a few months ago because he passed away of old age. He was in his late 70s or so. Now, ever since Benazir Bhutto became Prime Minister, it has been confrontation. Till then, it was all coexistence. So that is why we are discussing civil military relations in Pakistan. Every country has civil military relations. Governance in every country involves civil military relations. But not of the proportions in Pakistan, because for 35 years of Pakistan's existence, it has been under martial law. In fact, when President Ziaul Haq was the Chief Martial Law Administrator, the abbreviation was CMLA, Chief Martial Law Administrator. And he would say, I'm giving up power in the next 6 months. I'm giving up power in the next 6 months. So the joke became cancelled by last announcement. CMLA, Chief Martial Law Administrator. It is, as Lord Acton says, absolute power, what power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I'm sure you studied that. So, this is the import of civil military relations. The whole idea in this exercise of giving you people this lecture is, when you open the newspapers tomorrow or watch the television news and you see something on Pakistan, I am trying to give you the backstory to Pakistan. What is happening? Yeah. Now, in India, the military is not so much of a preeminent institution like in Pakistan. In India, what is the preeminent institution here? Anybody from the audience would like to answer? Or any of the faculty? Who is the preeminent institution in India? Huh? Take a guess here. What is the most powerful institution in India? Anybody? Yeah. Venture a guess, no harm. Today, it is the most powerful institution in India, and my interpretation of things is the Indian Administrative Service. But the equivalent of the IAS in Pakistan is called the CSP, Civil Service of Pakistan. The CSP is not necessarily that important. Why? It is because the military is more important. That's the short point I'm trying to put across. So, I mean, how do I illustrate this point better? You all are a much later generation. I was a kid, I was in class 5 or 4 or something like that in 1971 when the India-Pakistan war took place. And what was the aftermath of that war?
Bangladesh.
Yes, very good. But Bangladesh was created as the only nation in the post-Second World War period to be created through the force of arms. And that is despite the opposition of the United States. The United States sent in an aircraft carrier, USS Enterprise, into the Bay of Bengal. Anyway, all that is history. The relevance of that point here is, before Bangladesh broke away from Pakistan, the Pakistan Army's strength, manpower strength, was only 3.5 lakhs. After Bangladesh, the Pakistan Army's manpower strength became 5 lakhs, with half the territory to defend. The force level went up. Today it is in the region of 6 lakhs. So that is sort of speaks for itself how powerful the army is to get. I mean, after all, to increase manpower strength, there are a lot of financial and implications and budgetary allocations and all that required. So that is the Pakistan Army for you here. See, what happens is, anybody tell me, how do you drive a car? You can only have one driver, right? But what is the problem with Pakistan? When you say civil military relations, what does that mean?
Sir, no Prime Minister has completed that term.
Yeah, it means that there are two drivers. Can you have two drivers in a car? So that is what is happening to Pakistan. There's a civil driver and there's a military driver. So it is the civilian face with the military in the as the backroom boy. So that is not going anywhere, and that is why Pakistan is having a lot of problems. As we go along, I'll make you understand and simplify it for you. Okay? Yeah. So these are the reasons, the external threat environment. See, right when when partition happened in 1947, there was the first India-Pakistan war 3 months after or 2 months after. And then the Pakistani army was sort of holding fort, and that became very preeminent. So then the external threat environment again got exaggerated when in December 1979 the Soviet Union moved into Afghanistan. And see, there's always a sort of discomfort when you have a powerful neighbor. So the Pakistan army again gained importance. Not only the Pakistan army, they are equivalent of our BSF. On that border, it's called the FC, the Frontier Corps. The ISI and the Pakistan Air Force. They had to guard against Soviet aerial intrusions. And the Frontier Corps had to guard against infiltration into Pakistan by Soviet agents and whatnot. So anyway, and now the whole thing is, I think I've mentioned somewhere here, it is what you call the concept of a garrison state or a national security state, where security gains ascendance over development. Okay, imagine a 6 lakh army and that economy takes a beating. Sometime back, if you remember, in 2008, the United States, when there was the Lehman Brothers Wall Street crash and all. Why did that happen? It happened because the United States Army military had 6 lakh troops deployed between Iraq and Afghanistan. The exchequer went bankrupt. So same thing in Pakistan. Pakistan doesn't have any overseas military deployment. I'm just saying paying the pensions and salaries of the 6 lakh personnel is not a joke for the state exchequer. In India, what has happened? You have that one rank, one pension problem, and that has finally ended up with the new scheme for the military called Agniveers, because the government realizes that you can't bear this burden. It's not a joke. So anyway, so Pakistan at the end of the day is, like they say, an army with a country rather than a country with an army. Now, does the dog wag the tail or the tail wags the dog? When you have an army with a country, it's like the tail wagging the dog and not the dog wagging the tail. I hope you understand what I'm trying to get across. Yeah, so, yeah. Now, the failure of democracy. In India, we don't understand. We take our democracy for granted. It is like good health. As long as you enjoy good health, you take it for granted. The minute your health starts misbehaving or failing, that's when you realize the value of health. So, Pakistan is a victim of guided democracy or controlled democracy. As one of my former bosses, Shekhar Gupta, the man who does this walk the talk, he put it. He called it bonsai. You know the bonsai plants which don't grow their full height? He called it bonsai democracy. It's stunted. So, they say 3 people rule Pakistan: the president, or the chief of army staff, the president and the prime minister, the troika. Now, if there is some disharmony, it becomes apparent. It is something like the Ministry of Finance and the RBI governor. If there is some problem between them, it creates disharmony in the financial system. So, as law students, it will interest you to know that India had a constituent assembly which ran its full course, 5 years or whatever time it ran. Whereas Pakistan was unfortunate because its constituent assembly was dismissed in 1954. And the judiciary, the Supreme Court of Pakistan, along with the then Governor General Ghulam Muhammad, together decided to dismiss the constituent assembly. And that sounded the death knell of democracy in Pakistan. So when there's no democracy, there's a political vacuum. In that political vacuum, what happens? The military steps in. As we go along, I'll explain to you how that scenario can repeat once over again. Just before leaving home in the morning, I looked at the latest issue of the Dawn newspaper. What Times of India is to India, Dawn is to Pakistan. The Dawn. In fact, it's very surprising. The founder editor of Deccan Herald newspaper, Pothan Joseph, after setting up Deccan Herald in 1948, and after 2.5 years he had some differences with the management, he went on to Karachi and he started the Dawn newspaper there. Okay, so that's the Bangalore connection to the whole thing. There's something called the doctrine of necessity, where the army or the judiciary decides now the army has to be brought in. So these are the reasons why democracy failed. the civilian bureaucracy was also very, very cunning, if I can use that very crass word. And they colluded with the judiciary and they took hold of power. As a result, there was a completely lost generation. There were no politicians at all, no political class at all. Then how can you have democracy? So to say, the ecosystem for democracy never existed in Pakistan. And therefore, the failure of democracy. That is a very, very loud comment, or very profound comment which the late Benazir Bhutto makes. I am in office but not in power. Forget being in office. When Benazir Bhutto was Prime Minister, staying in the Prime Minister's house, there was an attempt to kidnap her son from the Prime Minister's house. When late General Pervez Musharraf was Chief of Army Staff, somebody asked him at a dinner, a party in the night, what happens, General? How will you protect yourself? So General Musharraf pulls out a Walter 7.65 PPK from his jacket and says, this is it. So what I am saying is the lawlessness in the country is phenomenal. I had occasion to once be, when I was in my Delhi days, liaison officer to a Pakistani Major General who was 6 months senior to Musharraf. And I was hobnobbing with him for a week. He later on became the National Security Advisor of Pakistan. He first became the Pakistan's ambassador to the United States, and next I saw he was the National Security Advisor of Pakistan. I have invited him home and spent some time with him in Delhi. So this man was telling me, as a serving Major General, his wife and her cousin were shopping in Karachi and then they were hijacked. They had to hand over their debit card. So that is the level of lawlessness. All the lawlessness is a product of the Afghan war, how the Soviet Union entered. I don't want to confuse you in the limited 45 minutes. Let me stick to my theme and not digress too much. So, the dismissal of the Constituent Assembly in 1954 is what you should figure out. Here I just tell, I won't even go into anything, I'll just stick to civil military relations and be done with that. Yeah. Now, actually, when you say civil military relations, I was thinking over it over the last few days when preparing for this lecture. It should actually be political military relations, because when you say civil, it will mean the civil service. And civil, here when they use the word civil, it means non-uniform. So what happens is the military doesn't know how to operate outside its sphere of operations. When it comes into the civil domain, they have to depend on the civilian bureaucracy. And so it's a sort of a win-win situation for the civil service and the military. Both are bureaucracies. Only thing, the civil service continues to maintain its importance and relevance even if there is military rule. So they are happy. It doesn't make them unhappy in any way. Okay. So the military plus the civil service is called the establishment in Pakistan. That word is very, very popular in Pakistani literature and Pakistani parlance. Establishment. Now that's why the term establishmentarian democracy has come about. Okay? So here you got to make the distinction between selected representatives, that is people like the civil service of Pakistan and whatnot, and you got to make the distinction between the elected representatives. So what happens here, the selected representatives, that is the Pakistani military leadership and the civil service leadership, have edged out the political class. Because even the politicians are not mature, they don't have too much exposure to operate. So whenever they get elected to power for short interregnums between military rule, then they are still again dependent on the civil services. If you are familiar with that, again it's much before your time, that TV serial, BBC serial called Yes Minister. So the equivalent in Pakistan is But Minister. But Minister means, Yes Minister means the bureaucrat will tell the politician, yes, I will comply with your diktat. But he will put in 3-4 buts or 3-4 ifs. For these reasons it cannot happen. Now that politician is confounded, the same scenario ensues in India also. If the politician is smart, what is a powerful politician? The powerful politician is one whose orders are followed, despite the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy was so strong in Pakistan. In 1972, when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto took over office post Bangladesh, he sacked 1,300 bureaucrats. Imagine Narendra Modi sacking 1,300 IAS officers in India. It's the equivalent of that, to break the back of the bureaucracy. And therein he started the system of lateral entry into the bureaucracy, exactly like the American system. Whenever a POTUS or the President of the United States demits office, there are about 16 to 17,000 vacancies in the US, wherein people from academia, industry and business move into government, which means the core bureaucracy in the US is much smaller. So Bhutto started the same thing, but somewhere along the line he messed up. I'll try and explain how that happens. Yeah. See, can the political leader who is wealthy, Western educated, understand the woes of the common man? Now, what happened is when Ziaul Haq was there in power, Ziaul Haq was from a very middle class background, and he sort of increased the intake into the army's officer corps, wherein the social composition of the officer corps changed and became very middle class and more representative of Pakistani society. So the average Pakistani military officer here believes that the Pakistan army is far more representative of the country in terms of the social mix. See, you have Punjab in Pakistan, you have Sindh, and you have Balochistan, and then you have the Northwest Frontier Province. Now, what gets left out is the Mohajir, the fifth nationality. Mohajir is the Indian refugee who went there to Pakistan and who was responsible and instrumental for the creation of Pakistan. So again, they are alienated. The bonds of religion have been inadequate to bind them together, which is why Bangladesh broke away in 1974. The ethnic identity overrides the religious identity, in short. Okay, anyway, we are coming to military dictatorship versus political rule. If you look at the late Benazir Bhutto, her son now, who is the foreign minister of Pakistan, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, they're all Western educated. If you look at Nawaz Sharif is not at all Western educated. Nawaz Sharif is a very Desi Punjabi kind of guy. And but the point is, Nawaz Sharif is very wealthy. And how did Nawaz Sharif come about? Nawaz Sharif happened. How? He's a creation of the army. So Zulfikar Ali Bhutto of an earlier generation and subsequent generation of Nawaz Sharif, they are all called civilian dictators who are creations of the army. The army nurtures them. So, yeah. Now the Pakistani political leadership is all about landed aristocracy. You know how land reforms in Pakistan have not been as successful as in India. So the feudal class, the landed aristocracy of Pakistan prefers to keep the population as illiterate as possible because they want their agricultural workforce in place. So that is why there is a failure of democracy in Pakistan. Okay, I forgot one slide, very important slide. See, this is how what are Pakistan's military tactics against democratic rule. I was talking about 1988, the elections in the last maybe how many years? Last maybe 40 years or 50 years? 40 years. The Pakistan's People's Party is considered very hostile towards the Pakistan army because Zulfikar Ali, because the Ziaul Haq, the dictator, army chief Ziaul Haq, he did what is called a judicial assassination of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He got him convicted by the court and judicial assassination. So naturally, the hostility between the PPP and the Pakistan Army. Pakistan Army is generally referred to as GHQ Rawalpindi, General Headquarters Rawalpindi. So GHQ and Pakistan People's Party were at complete loggerheads. Now when they were at loggerheads, Benazir Bhutto is trying to come to power. So what happens? What is the army's interference? The ISI, the Inter-Services Intelligence, they cobbled together, they put together an alliance of opposition parties called the IJI, the Islamic Jamhuri Ittihad, or the Islamic Democratic Alliance, to make sure that Benazir Bhutto doesn't win. But somehow the sentiment is very, very pro-PPP, leftist Islamic socialism, and then Benazir Bhutto comes to power. So that is the level of interference in the domestic dynamics of Pakistan by the GHQ Rawalpindi. Yeah, I did the next slide. I finished with this slide. Now, to understand the ongoing developments, if you take your own lives, when you were small children, you would listen to your parents, right? You didn't have an option when you were in school. Then as you come to high school, you become a little more egoistic. You think you know better and things like that. When you come to college and all, it's very difficult. So same way, the Pakistani political leaders, initially when they are nurtured by the Pak army, they are fine. They are on the same page. As Imran Khan likes to keep saying till he was sort of deposed from power. He was deposed from power through a no confidence motion. So that is again a constitutional conspiracy which Imran Khan, the GHQ Rawalpindi indulged in. There is something called the PDM, the Pakistan Democratic Movement, which is headed by the PMLN, Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz. Shahbaz Sharif is Nawaz Sharif's brother. Again, the problem with these parties is they are all dynastic. If you look at PPP, it is all dynastic, the Bhutto clan. If you look at the PMLN, then see PML, originally it was the IML, Indian Muslim League, which evolved over the years and became the Pakistan Muslim League. Then the Pakistan Muslim League sort of gradually deteriorated, and the Jamaat-e-Islami became more popular. Jamaat-e-Islami is a rightist party. Okay. Again, the Maulana Maududi, who is from Hyderabad, Deccan, he was one of the ideologues of the JI. The JI was against the Kashmir operations conducted by the Pakistan Army. The use of deception according to orthodox Islamic teachings is very unhealthy. So the Pakistan Army actually imprisoned Maulana Maududi in 1948 for going against the Pakistan Army's operational practices. Okay. So these are the 4 red lines. The Pakistani military does not like any elected democracy or democratic or political leader to interfere in A, its Afghan policy, B, its Kashmir policy, and 3, its India policy, and 4, its nuclear policy, and 5, military matters. Now Imran Khan, who's at the center of the controversy here today, attempted to interfere with army appointments. The appointment of DG-ISI, the present Pakistan Army Chief, General Asim Munir, he was DG-ISI for 7 months. After 7 months, Imran Khan decided to exercise his power as Prime Minister and transfer him from office. And that was the undoing of Imran Khan, among several other things. It is like, as lawyers, and some of you may venture into something called family law. If there's a divorce doesn't happen because of one reason. It builds up over the years, there are multiple reasons. So similarly here, any relationship, human relationship is very fragile, and development and differences develop very easily. So same way here, relations deteriorated between the political leadership and the GHQ Rawalpindi, General Headquarters Rawalpindi. That is the undoing. There is another school of thought, something written by a very well-known Pakistani writer now who's in SOA, School of Oriental and African Studies, called Aisha Siddiqa Agha. Now Aisha Siddiqa Agha talks about something called military business. Like the Chinese People's Liberation Army, the Pakistan Army is involved in an economic empire. They've got airlines, they've got sugar mills, they've got cement mills, they've got agriculture, they've got any number of enterprises going. So that economic incentive also inspires the Pakistan Army to retain power. And finally, as a Pakistani friend of mine was telling me, a very well-known author, journalist, author and all, called Ejaz Haider, whose father was a Pakistan Army officer. He was once telling me, he said it's like a dictator, he gets on a tiger. And then you don't know how to get off the tiger, because if you get off the tiger is going to eat you up. So you continue sitting on the tiger till you fall down or the tiger throws you off. So these are the red lines in civil relations. Okay. Yeah. Now there are several. Even today, when I opened the Dawn, there was some other scandal which has been leaked on television media. A discussion between a sitting Supreme Court judge's wife and a PTI leader's wife or mother-in-law, something like that. Some discussion which was captured and leaked on the television media. So the use of the news media is very strong. What is Memogate? Memogate, if you all remember, there was this big jihadi hero called Osama bin Laden. I'm sure you can't miss that name here, even if you try hard. So Osama bin Laden, when he was killed in Abbottabad in the Pakistani garrison town, then naturally there was a lot of anti-US sentiment and there was a lot of unrest, civil unrest in Pakistan. So fearing the civil unrest, this ambassador called Hussein Haqqani, who was the Pakistan's ambassador to the United States, he is supposed to have allegedly, or whatever word has to be used, written a note to Mike Mullen, Admiral Mike Mullen, the Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff, US Joint Chiefs of Staff, saying that the Pakistan army has to be reined in. Otherwise, they are likely to take over power. At that point in time, Nawaz Sharif was the Prime Minister. And this Memogate became a big thing. And it became a big scandal. There were some sackings here and there. I'm just trying to highlight inflection points in civil-military relations in Pakistan here. And then there's an exclusive news report in the Dawn, published I think as of 2017, called the Dawn Leaks. The Dawn Leaks were again about Nawaz Sharif telling the army that, see, what had happened what is happening in Pakistan is, those friendly jihadis coming over the border. Now, how can they just come over the border? Pakistan is a country. It's got a police, it's got an army, it's got everything. Now the army would not allow the Pakistani police to arrest the terrorists, to act against the terrorists. So much so, Nawaz Sharif reached a point. In Dawn Leaks, he's supposed to have said, why can't we go ahead with the Rawalpindi trials of those Mumbai attackers, those seaborne terrorists who came? Why is Pakistan holding up the case? Pakistan's international image is deteriorating, and the diplomatic space for Pakistan is shrinking, because no one in their right senses will want to invest, make any foreign direct investments in Pakistan. In my time, when I was on this Pakistan desk in the IDSA, I remember Japan Airlines, Swiss Airlines, Lufthansa, and several other airlines had withdrawn their services from Pakistan because of the corruption and lawlessness and whatnot. The only airlines operating there were like Emirates, Etihad, and those kind of airlines, where they would have airline connectivity to the Gulf and from there to Europe and elsewhere. Okay, so like I said, differences between these two, the political leadership, who's going to be in the driver's seat? There can only be one person in the driver's seat. When two people are trying to get into a driver's seat or backseat driving, they lose direction, focus, and orientation. See, that is why in 2018, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif lost the elections and Imran Khan was facilitated to win. The elections were engineered. Imran Khan won only by 4 votes, a very, very thin majority. How did Imran Khan win? The Pakistan army cobbled together all the small regional parties like Baloch National Party, Awami National Party, and made them side with Imran Khan with his Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. Tehreek-e-Insaf into English translates for Movement for Justice. I mean, because what do you have? In Pakistan, there are supposed to be 40 families which are ruling the roost. The poor get poorer and the rich get richer. Classical case of socio-economic crisis. So now, having given you more than adequate background, let me just touch upon contemporary democracy. Pakistan is synonymous with instability, political instability all along. It's nothing new. Initially, when the political instability came into the news, you think, this is a very standard thing. But then, if you look at it more closely, there are so many, how this crisis is got different nuances. The popularity of what is the basic crisis here? Forget about all this stuff written here, that's for ornamental purposes. What is the basic crisis? Today, the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf wants elections held in mid-May because its popularity graph is at the peak. Whereas the PDM or the Pakistan Democratic Movement, spearheaded by the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, they do not want to go in for elections right now. Because if they go in for elections right now, they are going to lose. Because the Awam or the people of Pakistan are very unhappy. The economy is in a free fall. And inflation is phenomenal. If you go through WhatsApp videos and all that, you'll find food riots, people running for, stampede for atta and things like that. So imagine the PMNL or the Pakistan Democratic Movement going in for elections at this point. They are definitely going to lose. And what is Imran Khan's appeal? Imran Khan, I'll come to that in the next slide. The other thing is, today it's like I mentioned on the slide, it's a 5-player game. You have, earlier it was just a 3-player game where you had the General Headquarters Rawalpindi, and then you had PPP and you had PMLN. And the GHQ would play off one against the other. But today you have, in addition to these 3 players, you have the 4th player, namely the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, Imran Khan's party, which has got a phenomenal following. And that following is among the youth. And Pakistan's population today is 24.14 crores. And 70% of that population is below 30 years of age. And they're all sort of tech-savvy guys connected on, social media. And that is what is sort of very unnerving. And now the Pakistan dictatorship, Pakistan army's dictatorship, military dictatorship or military rule, they clamped down on traditional media, whether print or television or something like that. But social media, they're finding it very difficult to control. Despite that, they've gone raided houses. But then what do you do when non-resident Pakistanis or overseas Pakistanis abroad, they sort of initiate social media? There's no control over them beyond the borders of Pakistan. So the Pakistan army is sort of in a very desperate situation. In fact, yesterday somebody gave me an intimation and sent me a small forward saying how the former Pakistan Army Chief of Staff, General Qamar Javed Bajwa, he was wanting to build up good relations with India, but Imran Khan opposed it. But these are all conspiracy theories, and it will confuse you more than it will sort of communicate anything worthwhile to you. So Pakistan has been through floods recently, you may be aware. Last year it went through severe floods. So this is the latest developments where I'm trying to link the background to the present emerging developments. Yeah, I already told you a little bit about this. Now, what is the rise of Imran Khan? I remember this was sometime in when was it? It was in 2000. I had the privilege to brief George Fernandez as defense minister at that point of time in Pakistan. I had a half-an-hour meeting with him in his office. And then when I brought up Imran Khan's name, he immediately told me, he said, "Arey, he's like Subramaniam Swamy," he said. So I was really amused listening to that. Anyway, so what is Imran Khan's appeal? He's talking about tabdeeli aa rahi hai. Now I'm not sure whether it's tabdeeli aa raha hai or aa rahi hai. I'm going to figure out. He talks about a Naya Pakistan. But electoral compulsions along the way, he's compromised. And there have been a lot of people from the PPP, the same zamindars, and all that who joined PTI, because finally democracy is all about how many votes you can mobilize. All this idealism and all is good for academic discussion and drawing room talk. So tabdili aa raha hai, aur rahi is all about change. Tabdili is the Urdu word for change. Everybody wants change. Everybody is fed up. And Imran Khan's appeal is he's got 80 cases against him. There's some case where he's misused official gifts and made money out of it and whatnot. But he doesn't have the baggage of corruption that the Bhutto family has, that Nawaz Sharif has. Nawaz Sharif was indicted in the Panama Leaks case, where a lot of money stashed abroad. So, this is the political landscape. And that is a major problem. Pakistani politicians, post-electoral victory, they continue electioneering and they pause the governance bit. And when they pause that governance, that's where the vacuum. And that's where the possibility of the army stepping in again. See, the army paints the politicians as cartoons. They're not very impressed with them because they haven't had occasion to become savvy in office. So it's a chicken and egg syndrome. Whom do you blame? Now, the other appeal of Imran Khan, despite all his westernized, lifestyle, he was married twice, and his, I think his second wife or first wife was a Jew, a British Jew, and he mounts a lot of anti-American rhetoric, and that anti-US rhetoric is very popular with the rank and file of the Pakistani citizenry. Okay, because if you remember when the global war on terror happened after the 2002, the Americans told Pakistani, they told Musharraf, either you're with us or you're against us. So I remember January 12th, it was 2000 or something, 2002, and he made a speech, and Musharraf didn't have an option but to join the global war on terror. All this has created a lot of anti-American sentiment. And then the American drones, the US military drones going and killing people in Afghanistan, and some collateral damage, some Pakistanis are killed and whatnot. So there's a lot of anti-US, though the anti-US sentiment in Pakistan is so strong, they say that you ask a plane load of Pakistanis traveling out, how many of you want a US green card? Everybody put up their hands. So public consumption is one thing and private preferences are another. Okay. So yeah, so that is why the anti this thing. And now, what do you say? Imran Khan is very sort of pro-Islam, and he's pro-Islam and anti-American. That goes together. Okay. Yeah, and. Now the increase in Imran Khan's popularity, particularly among the urban and middle class households, that alarms the Pakistani military, the GHQ Rawalpindi, because the lawyers' movement that I talked about in 2007 against Musharraf, it showed a democratic impulse. And finally, in any country, the will of the people matters. And when GHQ Rawalpindi saw the lawyers' movement, though they say that the lawyers' movement was again encouraged by GHQ Rawalpindi to oust Musharraf, to depose Musharraf. Because Musharraf was that typical dictator who was refusing to get out from the tiger. Okay, finally, one of his juniors had to take him in and say, you damn well stepped down. And that's how it finally happened. So today there is a lot of display of street power that the PTI is able to mobilize. In the key towns of Lahore, Peshawar, Karachi and Islamabad. Imagine it's a situation where the Pakistani police is unable to arrest Imran Khan in his residence at Lahore because all his supporters are outside. They said, no, you can't arrest him at all. So that is the situation. And who are the external guarantors of Pakistan? Now there is some talk, I don't know what stage of discussion it's reached. Saudi Arabia and I think Qatar, I'm not sure which country. One of those countries are trying to bail out Pakistan. But it's like a poor relative. A poor relative asks you for financial assistance. Once, twice, thrice you give financial assistance. After that you start shunning him. You say, how much can you do it? That is the situation of with Pakistan today. Okay, so these are the drivers of political instability. Yeah, this next is my last slide. Just spend a minute or 40 seconds to read this quote by Ashraf Jahangir Qazi. He was the former Pakistani High Commissioner in New Delhi when I used to be there. He wrote this a month ago in the Dawn newspaper. That will give you a complete sense. See, how do you interpret the news? See, the statement that the former army chief made, Qamar Bajwa, when anybody knows that things have failed completely, then you don't want to associate yourself. Now, Pakistan, whether many years ago when I was sort of studying Pakistan, I remember my then guru, Professor Khalil Bahadur of JNU. He told me he said you must read a book, but the problem is it's in Urdu. It's called Pakistan Toot Jayega, question mark. Now that reality of, I'm sure you understand some level of Hindi. Bollywood is popular in the country. So Pakistan Toot Jayega, that's a reality which is going to happen now. And I was talking about the latest leak, audio, it's an audio leak which I read in the morning before coming in the Dawn. That the script for new martial law is going to be ready. Because look at the confusion. If you see what is happening here, the President and Prime Minister are involved, the judiciary is divided. They are divided, and the Election Commission challenges the Constitution and the Supreme Court. Now do you understand why I ventured into this topic of Pakistan civil military relations? Civil military relations is a fact in every country, but this is a little different case, and that's what makes it unique. So I don't know this Bajwa, when he went to Washington DC at the embassy of Pakistan there, he made this, he publicly proclaimed that the army will no longer intervene in politics. But today, if the crisis sort of boils over, then the army will be forced to step in. So on that note, I will stop, and if there is any interaction questions, I'll be glad. Thank you very much for your patience. Yeah, please.
Can I get a mic?
Why don't you come here and address this thing? People behind you won't be able to hear you here. Come here. Come here. Face the audience.
So actually, I have a question for you.
No, but the people behind won't hear your question.
So I asked a mic for that. So sir, basically, I want a clarification from your statement where you said like anti-Islam means anti-American. Like, so.
Not anti-Islam, I said pro-Islam.
Yeah. Pro-Islam means being anti-American.
Mm-hmm.
But then what I say is like Saudi Arabia has very good relations with America.
No, Saudi Arabia's relations with America have deteriorated. Saudi Arabia has become very friendly with Iran lately. You're right.
But then Joe Biden himself said like I'll ensure that Islam will be treated as any other religion in this world.
Mm-hmm.
So I want a clarification, like what do you actually mean by being pro-Islam is anti-American?
Pro-Islam means you like your country, you like your culture, you like your religion much more than you like US culture and US this thing. See, like I told you, January 12th, 2002, was it 2002? After the world that, that attack on US Pentagon and all that aerial terrorism. After that, the anti-American sentiment went up in Pakistan. Forget that. After the Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan, see, Pakistan was a frontline state as long as the Soviet Union was there. And the Pakistan ISI and army was facilitating that jihad. The CIA was funneling in money to the ISI, and the ISI would pass it on to the Shura, the Mujahideen, those leaders, Hekmatyar and company. And once the Soviet Union withdrew, there was a strategic vacuum in the region. And naturally the US said we are not interested in you anymore. And then they tried to bring them to book. They had the Pressler Amendment and this amendment and that amendment saying you guys are doing the nuclear bomb. How can you do it? Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. I spoke about a judicial assassination by Ziaul Haq. That was at the American instance. Because Zulfikar Ali Bhutto said even if we go hungry, we will take 1,000 years but we will produce the bomb. And hello high water, he got the bomb. I mean the technology. And the American, so you can you understand the American anti-American sentiment?
So basically America is anti-Pakistan, not anti-Islam, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. It's no, they are. See, after the former Soviet Union collapsed, the communist threat disappeared. Then they manufactured a new threat. What was that new threat? It emanated from Iran, the Islamic threat. So am I making some sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hope I haven't confused you more than.
No.
Yeah.
Sir, if the power of the military is reduced officially in Pakistan, would it help reduce these civil tensions? Would it help Pakistan grow as a democracy?
Yeah, totally. Because the army doesn't want to have good relations with India. The Pakistan army doesn't want to have good relations with India. If there is good relations with India, the importance of the Pakistan army will go down. And once it goes down, then there's something called the Gairat, the pride of the Pakistan Army Officer Corps. That Gairat, they won't have it. It's all ego driven here. You go on YouTube and you see these Pakistani generals talking, very patriarchal, extremely patriarchal characters. Okay, so the whole thing is, if you look at Myanmar is also under martial law, and you look at the the economy is pathetic. So also is Pakistan's this thing. I remember I have been through a lot of track 2 diplomacy sessions with Pakistani friends. And I also had occasion to write a 10,000 word research paper, my toughest ever piece of writing on Pakistan's economy. My boss in the IDSA had told me to write it. It was a hell of a challenge. For 3 months I didn't know whether I was sleeping or living till I put that thing. Pakistan's prosperity is all pseudo-prosperity. Okay? They don't have any manufacturing industry. Like we have the Maruti Suzuki here, they call it the Suzuki Bolan. Their only industry worthwhile is their defense industry. That is the, that is the sort of engine of economic growth. Otherwise, they don't have anything. They don't have the ability to manufacture. I think a bicycle they manufacture. They don't even have the ability to manufacture heavy vehicle tires, truck and bus tires. When I was studying the Indo-Pak trade, I wrote a research paper once. And I felt very satisfied when Economist Intelligence Unit sent me a fax trying to clarify something. I felt good. We export 5 lakh tires, or the Pakistan's requirement at that time in 2000 was 5 lakh truck and bus tires. So what we would do is there's something called ATT, Afghan Trade and Transit Agreement. We would export these truck and bus tires to Afghanistan, and they would come back across that human border, Afpak border, into Pakistan. Because Pakistan's requirement of tires was 5 lakhs, but they could produce only 3.5 lakhs. So 1.5 lakh gap they had. Now all this is the army. I don't know. Like in India, it's difficult to get a license. See, India and Pakistan are not very different. We are a little more advanced than them. Okay, we are not very advanced. We are a little more advanced. That's all I'll say. If you look at North India versus South India, you'll see a lot of difference. You'll find North India much more akin to Pakistan, or resembling Pakistan much more. I remember traveling with this Pakistani general from Delhi to Agra to show him Taj Mahal, and then he said, "Arey, this is quite like Pakistan," he said. So, the army has to sort of be cut to size. Forget, you talk of Nawaz Sharif and Benazir Bhutto. Everybody is saying that. Yeah? Imran Khan is saying, if I have the authority and I have been voted Prime Minister, why can't I have the power to decide what to do? Okay, I hope I have answered your question to the extent possible.
Sir, during the Soviet-Afghan war, that during Soviet-Afghan war, Ziaul was the one who was a military dictator, but he was completely in favor of USA. Then why did they kill him in a plane crash?
That is a question I can't answer. Only God can answer. Why did they kill him in the plane crash? What I was reading is, one was this Muhajir army chief called Mirza Aslam Beg. Okay, there are a lot of conspiracy theories. Mirza Aslam Beg is a Muhajir from India. Okay, he was supposed to come for one of our conferences, but he didn't come. He sent his number to another Muhajir from Bihar. So I spent a lot of time with that gentleman. He was a social psychologist from Duke University, I remember. And he regretted his decision of going to Pakistan. Anyway, to answer your question, why they killed him was his title was CMLA, Chief Martial Law Administrator. And like I told you, the joke became cancelled my last announcement. He was not stepping down from power. Please remember, I talk about this Pakistani general who I was with. This Pakistani general was his MA, his military advisor as a brigadier. His name is Durrani, Muhammad Ali Durrani. He was the ISI station chief in Washington for 7 years during the Cold War. This Durrani. Okay. So, Durrani is supposed to have planted a crate of mangoes into that C-130. No one knows what Aisha Siddiqa Aga, I mentioned this name, what Aisha Siddiqa Aga told me when I met her abroad once. She said they were going on that aircraft, C-130 Hercules, to Bhavalpur for tank firing trials of the M1 Abrams American tank. So a small model of that tank, which was metal, was given inside that aircraft. These are all conspiracy theories here. That was given, and inside that was PE, plastic explosive. But what the reports say is that the pilots were dead even before the aircraft crashed, which means there was some Shia airman or somebody. And you know, there's a Shia-Sunni divide. Pakistan is 80% Sunni and 20% Shia. In Pakistan is a political football between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is Wahhabi Sunni and this thing is Shia, Iran. So one of the Shia airmen is supposed to have put some nerve gas, and that nerve gas is supposed to have incapacitated the pilots, because I think 8 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft went down. So the other person, they suspect who killed him was late Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's son called Murtaza Bhutto. Murtaza Bhutto was running an organization, a terrorist organization called Al Zulfikar. So the chief suspects here are Al Zulfikar, led by Murtaza Bhutto, and Mirza Aslam Beg. Because please remember, the American ambassador to Pakistan was on board that aircraft. He also lost his life. Okay, for some reason this gentleman, I was LO2, liaison officer to Muhammad Ali Durrani, the brigadier, he didn't get onto the aircraft at that point. Why this is a question that, it's like saying, why was President John F. Kennedy killed? The conspiracy theory is the CIA killed him because he was opposed to their policy or something like that. Okay, so what I can tell you, I will tell you, that's all. Thanks, yeah. Thank you everybody for your interaction, participation, and the rest of it.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful comprehensive talk and the engaging session. We have come to the end, and I request Mansi, a third-year student of PPLLB, to deliver a word of thanks.
Knowledge is priceless, and thank you is too short a word to express our gratitude for the priceless words you have shared with us today, sir. On the behalf of CMR School of Legal Studies, I, Mansi Kavirama, of BBA LLB Honours, would like to extend an extensive vote of thanks. First and foremost, we often judge a book by its cover, and sir has sent a wonderful message saying that please do not judge a country like Pakistan just by the face value. He has very well expounded the situation Pakistan has undergone, of how geography comes before history. The multi-party system, though prevalent, has been curbed by the means of military, and how the collapse of democracy is somewhere resulting in the downfall or the pseudo-development of the said nation. The eye-catching part was that the use of metaphors of bonsai, the stunted growth of bonsai, to expound on how the relations are prevalent. Also, Sir very well expounded on a very unfamiliar term for all of us here, that is establishmentarian democracy, that is a combination of military and civil service. And also how, when someone was asking about religion, he very well expounded how military tried to overrule the very basis of religion. Often Islam is associated with terrorism, but he clearly gave us an instance where military tried to curb, an instance where Maulana was trying to, enlighten people with what are the actual understanding of Islam, the values of Islam. So it clearly depicts that Pakistan as a country is somewhere under the rule of military rather than the proper understanding of what religion is. Thank you, sir. Half knowledge is always harmful, and thank you for bringing a cup of learning filled with your wise words. And, thank you so much, sir. The vote of thanks would be incomplete if I do not include our beloved dean, Dr. P.R. Subramanian. If there has been a blunder, I'm sorry, sir. Our beloved director, Dr. Vijay Praneshwari, Vandana ma'am for helping us coordinate, our MC for the day, the technical team, and the audience here who spared the time to be a part of this wonderful seminar. Thank you and have a marvelous day ahead.